Hi everybody, welcome to Leading for Life Stories Season 2. My name is Bob Judson and I'm your host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Thanks very much, and I really hope you enjoy what follows. My guest this week is the inspirational and gregarious Mandy Hickson. Mandy had a fantastic 17-year career in the Royal Air Force, flying the Tornado GR4 as one of the very first women in the fast jet world, indeed one of the first women in flying roles full stop in the Royal Air Force. She obviously had a really interesting time seeing how that transitioned across her career and as she looks back on it now. These days, she's written a book. She's the author of a really fabulous book that I thoroughly recommend to you called An Officer, Not a Gentleman, which is hugely entertaining and was a real trip down memory lane for me because so many similar stories and things from my own time in the Air Force and everything that went on in her flying training and then subsequently on an operational squadron. She's also a very active and very successful public speaker, recently listed as one of the top 20 motivational speakers for 2024 in the UK. The list that she's on is one of the who's of the speaking circuit, really. Some amazing names up there. And Mandy is to no kind of phrase, she's killing it. She's doing a really great job, and I think is a fabulous role model for people in all sorts of walks of life with what she brings to the table. We had a lot of fun making the podcast. There's so many similar things and people we know and stories that are we can relate to. And I hope we bring out quite a lot of things that are actually useful to you in leadership terms as well, because there's an awful lot of that in there. So I really do hope you enjoy it. It was one of the ones that I've loved making the most. So here goes. Hey, Mandy, fantastic to have you on my podcast. I'm really thrilled to look forward to a conversation with a fellow Air Force officer and fast jet pilot. So delighted to have you here.
It's lovely to join you, Bob. As we were talking earlier, we could probably chew the fat for hours and hours without actually recording a podcast.
Yeah, I think so. I think it probably would actually make quite an interesting podcast in its own right, to be honest. I think some of the conversation, we might have to censor the odd bit, but it is great because we have so much common ground and so many kind of people we know in common and that sort of thing. So it's really lovely to talk to you again. I know obviously more about you than many do, and you've had an incredible career journey so far. Multifaceted. You've gone from being RAF pilot to published author. You're now a publicly acclaimed public speaker and making a hugely successful career out of that. But just to put some flesh on the bones of that and get us started, could you give a brief resume of your kind of career journey from your perspective?
Absolutely. So a very quick canter through the early years. First got into flying through the Air Cadets. My grandpa was a pilot in the Second World War. His stories really started to fan the flames of the passion within me as well. So when the Air Cadets opened their doors to girls, I joined. I flew. And it really, absolutely set my heart on following that as a chosen career path. But women weren't allowed to be pilots. Chipped away at it. I gained a flying scholarship at the age of 17. That led on to me gaining my private pilot's license. Then headed off to university and joined the University Air Squadron. So another fantastic organisation for young people. I gained 160 hours of flying. Those were the good old days, Bob, to be honest. And in my second year at uni, they changed the rules, allowing women to be pilots in the Air Force. I applied and I failed all of the aptitude tests, not once, but twice. But fortunately, managed to get in the end, which we can perhaps talk about later. But and then I ended up progressing through the flying training system and flying the Tornado GR4 originally on 2 Squadron at RAF Marham, and tours of duty after that as well. And I left in 2011, having served for 17 years.
Nice. Okay. Fantastic Air Force career. Just to kick off, I mean, interesting. As you say, the good old days on flying. I did a flying scholarship when between leaving school and actually joining the Air Force on the back of the Air Cadets, and it was the same thing. It was 30 hours, but then you only had to have 35 to get a PPL. So I did my PPL as well, and I had a PPL before I had a driving license. So which was amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. I use my paper round money to pay for the additional 10 hours. That is a lot of newspapers that I had to deliver, I can tell you. But I used that money and I got my license, and we had to have 40 hours. And I remember I got my license with exactly 40 hours in my logbook.
Yeah, no, I had exactly the same thing, and it was fabulous, and I remember it well. And the sad thing, I don't know about you, I never really used my private pilot's license very much subsequently. Probably the time I should have done was when I was station commander at Coningsby and was flying on the Battle of Britain Memorial flight. I could have kind of re-energized it with Spitfires and Hurricanes, which ironically, because they were the right weight to qualify. But I've never actually done it. I had a fascinating conversation with the chief flying instructor at Shoreham Airport, which is probably the nearest one to where I live. And I said, what do I need to do if I need to get this back? And he said, well, what have you done? So I said to him, well, I don't 3,500 hours fast jet, flown Jaguars, Typhoons, Spitfires, Hurricanes. He said, well, it's not going to be much then, is it? It was just hilarious. But I didn't actually pursue it. And I've not gone through it. Have you done much with it or not?
It was, when I was based at Handling Squadron at Boscombe Down in my final tour, one of the bosses had previously done a deal whereby we could utilise the local flying club at Thruxton and get some hours. And so actually I re-energized my license then. And because I was then flying on the Air Experience flight and flying with University Air Squadron students as well at Southampton, I was able to keep my license current actually during that time, which was great because it then led on to me getting my twin rating as well at Thruxton. And then that led on to me getting my commercial pilot's license as well. So when I left the Air Force, but actually, I haven't really utilised it particularly. I mean, I could do. In fact, my husband's literally just got his through the post about a week ago because he decided it would just be madness not to take all our children flying and family and friends flying, because they'll have never had that experience before. Perhaps, he loses interest in doing that himself as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. That's very true. If you've got family that you can bring to it, that's probably the one reason it would drag me back to it as well, because I think just for as you and I have both been rushing around with our hair on fire at low level and doing that sort of thing. And so the prospect of flying a Cessna at 90 knots doesn't actually fill me particularly with joy, which is one of the reasons I've never done it. Just switching tack back to early days. I mean, it's interesting on early. I like to talk about early motivations for people as to how they got into things, and you hinted at that quite a lot with obviously your grandfather having been a wartime pilot. My father was a wartime bomber pilot, flew Blenheims. Sadly, I never really got to know about it. He had a DFC from the Cologne Power Station raids and things like that, and he died when I was 3. So I have very little other than his service record and seeing what he did and all that sort of thing. The one thing I don't have, which is a real shame, is his logbooks. But I think I got some genetic inspiration from that, and I've got quite a military family anyway. But motivations for you? I mean, it sounds like from very early doors, you were just interested in flying and that's what you wanted to do, right?
Yeah, my grandpa was a very very quiet man, and always wore a suit, always wore a tie, even if he was gardening, classic sort of that generation. But actually, he would drip feed me these stories. And I think a really monumental moment was my 21st birthday when he presented me with all of his wartime medals and all his logbooks, actually. So I do have all of those.
Oh, wow.
And we found loads of pictures of his time serving in Africa. So he did a lot of flying on the Harvard and Oxford. And, what was really funny as well was he had lied about his age to get in because it was sort of wartime. And he was actually 9 years too old. And he lied about his age and said he was younger than he was. And basically on every report, it just says, Cuttle is a very mature man for his age. And I just think, can you imagine that these days going, yeah, I'm 9 years younger than I am. It's fine. Not checking birth certificates or anything, really.
Yeah, that's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, so he was a huge role model. But I think I was really lucky as well, sort of on a closer sort of level. My mum was, she brought me up as a single parent. My mum and dad divorced when I was very young, when I was just 2. And although I kept a very close relationship with my dad, my mum, was this incredibly strong woman. And I think she just sort of showed me that whole thing of you can do whatever you want to do. And consequently, my sister became a palliative care consultant. She's a medical director of a hospice. And again, she was an incredible role model because she was 2 years older than me and she had an incredible work ethic because she had decided she wanted to be a doctor. And she was told that she didn't have the grades. And so she started working for her A-levels in the January, and I just felt guilty that I was doing my GCSEs and not doing anything. So again, just having those sort of people around me, these incredible, personalities and that sort of resilience that they were building up already was a really, really good, example to set for me.
Yeah, no, I actually, again, similar circumstance. My mum was because obviously she was a single mum in the 60s, which was a pretty hard thing anyway, for sure. I have undying admiration for what she did to set me up well for success, and not, she didn't push me, but she did, she motivated me. She found ways to, to enable the things that I subsequently did. And that was amazing, obviously, to have then gone. And I mean, I never thought I was going to spend as long as I did in the Air Force. And it was a truly incredible part of my life, obviously. Just sticking with the Air Force thing, because you mentioned obviously failing aptitude tests. Interestingly, I did the same. I went for a test in advance, as they used to do it at Biggin Hill when I was 16, and I passed the medical, passed the interview, and but failed the aptitude. And they said come back in a year, and I did a whole load of massive sweating to am I going to crack this? And I'd actually went back and I can remember having read your book recently. I think there's so much of there that is so relatable to me, because I can remember sitting, and bear in mind this is a long time ago now, I was sitting in the kind of waiting room area at Biggin Hill, and when they were starting to call people through for review at the end of this, and my name got called. And I went, oh no, because I've gone back, I thought this is going to be just a disaster. And I went in, and this chap was sat there, and he said, well, I'm really sorry to tell you that you failed the aptitude test for navigator. And I kind of just was sitting there kind of, let this sink in a minute. Does that does that still mean I'm okay for pilot? I said, yeah, you're okay for pilot. I was kind of,
oh my gosh.
And he just didn't care. I don't think he completely got it, really. I didn't, to be honest, I don't remember whether he was. He may have even have been a navigator, which would have been really ironic with this, where actually I was just euphoric. That was fine. I was through. But your journey, I mean, clearly you were absolutely at the groundbreaking front edge of this for female aircrew. I mean, obviously I was in an Air Force for a long time where women's roles were seriously restricted. We were talking before we came on air about the ridiculous rules in some ways when you look back on it with hindsight that did apply, and the processes that were applied to people. But just talk about that kind of journey, because I mean that's fascinating that you were right at the sort of the front edge of this.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you've chosen a career choice, but the career doesn't exist. So you've got this sort of this mismatch really in your ambition, but what you can actually achieve. And I often say, when you've chosen the impossible dream, what do? Well, you just have to keep on moving in the right direction. And that was something that was that feeling of chipping away at it, just constantly, moving forward and sort of taking every single opportunity that could come up, everything from any leadership position that you could take at school or within the cadets or within the Rangers, I took, because I just kept on thinking, I want to be in the best position. So when they do change the rules, and this was sort of quite how blindly I was believing that they would, that I can basically be in the best position to actually to apply. But I did have a backup of, I basically thought I was going to join the police force. I've obviously got something about uniform, in the back of my mind. So that was my backup plan. But yeah, to be at university, and I remember this very, very clearly. We were in the bar, and there were 4 girls, and the boss of the University Air Squadron, a gentleman called Squadron Leader Carl Bufton, he came in and he said, girls, you will not believe it. The rules have literally just changed today. And we were euphoric. And myself and this girl called Ness instantly said, right, we're applying. And we almost applied it like the next day. And we ended up being selected to go to Officer Aircrew and Selection, the OASC, together, and which was really bizarre. And we were even on the same cohort as we went through. So, you've got one of your really great friends that actually is even in your same little group for all of the leadership exercises and the teamwork. And we went through, and Ness passed, and she got a really high score in her aptitude tests, and I failed them. And I was so devastated, and I was trying to be really pleased for her, but I was just thinking, I can't believe I failed.
I can imagine.
You passed really high for navigator. So I thought, okay, well, I failed pilot, but at least I've got the nav as a backup. At least I'll be airborne. And then off the back of that, they offered me air traffic control. And that was not where I wanted to go, because I didn't want to be grounded. It was always going to be about being airborne for myself. And then I went back, and the boss said, well, I just think this doesn't make sense. You're flying at a really high level. So of my university air squadron intake, I was probably at one of the top couple of pilots that were going through. And he said, let's look at the system. And he requested that I flew back. And actually they flew me back in a Bulldog to Cranwell. And I redid the tests again. and I failed them completely again. And actually, I got back and I remember crying. I'm a big weeper. I'm very emotional, all my friends would say. And he just said, no, this is just fuel for my fire. I almost am pleased that you failed, because to me, this says to me that the tests are not right. And when you actually looked at it and when he investigated, he found out that, the majority of women were failing these tests outright, whereas the majority of men were passing them. So there's this unconscious bias that was existing really at that testing stage so early on, because they'd simply never been tested on women. So there's no issue with that. It's simply that they needed to open their eyes to actually women and men do process things quite differently. And actually, if you want a test which is going to be, a level playing field, you might need to re-engineer your tests. And they did do that. And then they invited me back. Actually, I was flying the Tornado at the time, and they invited me back and said, Mandy, can you redo these tests? And I passed them. Thank goodness, Bob. I was so stressed.
No pressure, yeah.
No pressure. Can you imagine if I failed them? I'm just rubbish. I shouldn't be here, And I was flying Tornado at the time, and I thought I'd prefer to be shot at in Iraq than actually do these tests again.
I can imagine that. Yeah, that would be challenging. Yeah, it was really interesting, because I think that I remember that time very, very well, and there were so many practical things as well. I mean, just the kit when we did start getting female pilots and navigators coming through the system. Then obviously all the kit had been designed for guys,
I know.
because that's who we'd always allowed to fly. So it was inevitably a big change. When you kind of look back at it now and the journey you had, how much better is it? Have we still got a way to go, or are we? I do.
I think we still have a long way to go, to be honest. I mean, you touched on the kit side of things. I mean, I literally flew in male long johns with a Y front the entirety of my career, even when I was on the University Air Squadron helping, in the latter stages. I was like, have we not got female kit? I could go to Marks and Spencer's and buy some long johns. Why am I still wearing Y fronts? And of course, for smaller people, I mean, I'm 6 foot tall, so at least I've sort of got a male physique, but of course it all fits you in the wrong places. So actually you just always feel slightly uncomfortable in your kit. But it took years for that to change. I mean, it was almost like went through a political and a policy change, but they hadn't thought through any single one of their processes. And that's what frustrated me. Now, have we changed? Yes, we have come a long, long way in our journey. But there is still, I think, a long way to go before we completely see that sort of equal footing and that inclusivity, equity. Because we could talk about equality, but to me, it's about equity. It's about allowing and giving people the tools of the trade to allow them to do that job to the best of their ability, regardless of where they are. And I know that Mike Wigston, as the Chief of the Air Staff, made some really big choices in how he was looking at recruiting, and I know that was very politically incorrect in many ways, because legally they can't say stop recruiting white men. I know that, and that's not right. It is illegal, which is why it obviously went through, some legal action. But ultimately, I do think he was trying to do the right thing. He was looking at a system, and he was shocked when he got to the top to see that no women had been through fast jet training for an entire 3 years. Not one. I mean, what is going wrong with the system in that stage?
That's bizarre, isn't it? It is very strange. I think it's interesting. I would share your view. I think it's got better, but there still seems to be an awful long way to go in this space. And I'd full credit to, we were talking earlier about mutual friends and so on that have actually gone quite a long way, and where Soraya Marshall, who's I think has done outstandingly well. Very well from your time, and used to work for me when I was still in the service. And there are a number of other ladies who've also done great things there. But it is too little, too late in some ways, and there's still been too many restrictions for bizarre reasons. I don't think they'd really thought it through. I can remember again when this was all happening that quite rightly a number of the women that were going through the system at the time were complaining. You may well have been one of them, actually. That, look, stop shouting out about all these female firsts. We don't want this. We don't want to be. We just want to be. It's not. One of the team. We just want to be part of the team, because I think that was quite grating for everybody. And again, one of the things I was very struck with in your book actually was particularly, I think it was a Valley, wasn't it, where your team really was kind of behind you and helping to push you forward. And that for me is what the military has always been all about. And it properly is. There is no I in team, and people really are very supportive. And as long as you you meld with that and you have the kind of right character to fit with the team, then the team will support you literally, nothing, leave no one behind, and you will lay down your life for people in your team, no question about it. So that's the Air Force I know, and I do think it's sad that in some ways we've really not embraced that as well as we could have done.
I think you're absolutely right, actually, and it's very interesting. And you touched on that point really well, actually, just in what you said there, is that this whole we didn't want to be the first. So it was fascinating when I got to the squadron, to 2 Squadron, and I flew with a female navigator. It was about my second year, and I was the author of Mara Matters, which was the station magazine, and I had to put in 2 Squadrons article every quarter or whatever it was. And I was rather foolish. I was very immature, let's just say. And I wrote the title, Two Birds Do It Together in a Tornado, because I thought, no one ever reads this. And actually, this might actually get someone's interest for once. So Helen and I had flown together, and I wrote this article. And then I just wrote the article as normal. Squadron's been deploying here, here, and here. And by the way, history has finally been made. Yes, 2 women have finally flown together in a tornado. There was no press. There was no nothing. It didn't go out into local papers or anything like that. But it was a first. Now, that was that. Now, I then went off to the Gulf, and about a week or 2 weeks later, Helen rings me in the Gulf, and she said, oh, my goodness, have you seen this article? I don't know what someone has done. They have written this horrific title. I was like, oh, it was me. And she said, you're joking. Why would you do that? And I said, I'm sorry, I just thought it was funny. And actually, she'd walked into the crew room, and the guys that were left behind that hadn't yet come out to the Gulf to join us had photocopied this headline and had decorated the entirety of the junior crew room with this article of 2 birds do it together in a tornado. And to say it was in her face would be an understatement. But the reason I sort of brought that story up is, people are very different. But about 4 or 5 years later, no, it's probably even longer than that, maybe 10 years later, I saw an article. It was in the Telegraph and it was in the newspapers. It was everywhere, of 2 women, an all-female crew have finally flown in a tornado together. I thought, fascinating. I actually contacted them and said, by the way, that was actually done myself and Helen about 8 years ago. And they were like, what? But that was because when we were doing our job in that initial tranche, I mean, Jo Salter was obviously the first, and she had to take the publicity hit in many ways. But even Jo said she didn't particularly want it. But for ourselves, coming in this sort of slight wave behind, we did have the joy of being under that parapet. And actually, there was no press attention. It was great. We didn't want any. We just wanted to get on with our jobs. But the flip side of that, which we can come to later, is on leaving. Where do you sit when you leave? And that's been a really interesting journey for myself, because I think for 17 years, just keeping quiet and wanting to do your job, not wanting to talk about it, to then you could say I've gone to the opposite end of the spectrum now, and I am talking about it all the time. So why is that? But we can talk about that.
No, that's a great segue, actually, because it is a leadership podcast, and I like to talk about leadership stuff. And one of the things that I often ask people is about leadership styles, personal leadership styles, and how you've adapted yourself over what has been, without any shadow of a doubt, a very successful but also very varied career. And so thoughts on that? I mean, where does that leave you?
I think one of the lessons that always sits with myself was one of the first things that we were taught actually going through officer training was that leadership's not a title. And I remember someone saying that to me, it's an action. So it's a verb. So if you think just because you have leader on your door that you are going to get respect, that is not the case. You have got to walk the walk and talk the talk, and which is about actually being authentic to yourself. So I think this is where I probably changed a little in my leadership style. There is that sort of sense of, does it have to be command and control? And I think we were all trying to perhaps do that in our earlier careers, perhaps sort of like that, not autocratic leadership, but much more, I've got to be in this certain style. But I think we have recognized that that doesn't work. Autocratic leadership is dead in the water. People want to feel empowered. I mean, people never leave their jobs because they don't like their job. It's always because they don't like their boss. And so actually, if they're feeling disempowered, well, that's going to be one of those reasons. And you can see that all the time when people go, I have to go to work. It's because they're not being motivated. And so I think the leadership sort of style that we've seen, from that top-down control to actually empathetic leadership, much more emotional intelligence being displayed, authenticity, is my absolute number one. Be yourself. You might be an introvert. It doesn't mean you're not going to be a good leader. You just need to perhaps change your style of leadership and not be the person that has to stand up in front of 500 people and be, way, here I am. But go and speak to people as individuals. Make sure that you are, imparting your own leadership style onto that organization rather than just thinking, I've got to fit in because the last boss was this. You don't have to mimic someone else's style. And that was my biggest lesson, I think, when I went through my journey in the Air Force and then on leaving, is that it's so important just to be yourself.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And I completely agree. In fact, I regularly talk these days. I do a lot of work with various organizations, developing leaders in all sorts of fora. And one of the things that that I always talk about is this misconception that the military is very authoritarian in its leadership style. And I mean, I make the joke. I say, look, I used to say to people that we're here to preserve democracy, not to practice it. And and that's true. I mean, at the end of the day, you do have the ability to be quite authoritarian if you need to. And there are clearly elements of the military where that is more important and times where that is more important than others. But certainly in the Air Force, I mean, the example I always use is when I was a squadron commander, there was no chance. If I was just taking an authoritarian style, I'd get absolutely nowhere. Because a lot of the people that were working for me, both ground crew and air crew, were they were more intelligent than me. They were more academically qualified than me, and you had to motivate them. You had to find a way to inspire them, to give them the vision that they were going to believe in what you were going to do and where you were taking them. Because if they're just following you out of curiosity, that's not a great way to be leading anybody, frankly.
No. I think you're absolutely right, Bob. And I've got a great friend of mine who's in the Navy, actually, and he went for an interview when he left the Navy. With a big organization, and they said, could you give me your best example of leadership? And he said, I was commander on board a ship, and my son had a really bad accident, and I left the ship to go and be with him because he had to have this operation and all the rest of it. And he said, and while I was away, the ship ran absolutely perfectly in my absence. And they went, well, why is that leadership? And he said, because I'd empowered every single person to be able to not just do their role, but to step up one. So actually what you're putting in place is this incredible, empowered leadership, that's going to be mirrored so that when you're not there, it can still keep on going. And it was sort of he flipped leadership on its head. And I think, they were sort of like, gosh, yeah, okay, that's a really interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, I tell a story very regularly, actually, about when I was commanding Kandahar Airfield in Afghanistan, which was huge. I mean, 25,000 people, 170 airplane thing. It was massive. And when I went on leave, for the first time, I went to Oman, and my wife came out and met me, and we had a lovely holiday in Oman, which was great. And I knew I needed to recharge my own batteries and come back kind of ready to go back into the into the melee that was what we were living on a daily basis. And I had a very capable Dutch deputy commander, and I said to him, right, okay, there are 4 things going on next week that I know are happening already and that you need to pay a lot of attention to. And that I've done this work, and here you go. Here's the handover of that. Everything else, you get on with it. There are 2 reasons you call me. One is if someone dies, or 2 is if somebody's going to, something that happens is going to make the international news, so that I find out about it from you rather than from somebody else. But otherwise, just get on with it and deliver. And the point behind the story, and I use it a lot for some of the courses I do, is that 2 things happen. One is I have a much better holiday, and actually genuinely do recharge batteries and come back and refreshed. But the more important one is that he actually genuinely gets a chance to lead the organization with full authority, without being micromanaged, in a position where he feels trusted, properly empowered to do stuff, and it develops him, and obviously by extension the wider team. Because nobody's invincible for a start. You can't be in a position where you think you're absolutely indispensable to the organization. So I'm 100% with that. I think it's such an important feature, and I think it's one of the things actually that those of us who have served in the military, who have opportunities, and you as you and I both do nowadays, to kind of help and communicate some of this to organizations in the private sector generally, but sometimes in the public sector too, to be honest, to share some of these lessons in a way that is actually really useful to them. Because I think I've worked with lots of companies who the people are sat there saying, do you know what, we've suddenly been promoted in a position, we're running a team, and we've given nothing, we've given no tools. And I think one of the advantages that we had was obviously you did have tools. You had everything from the kind of basic foundation at Cranwell, in our case, up through the various courses and so on that get offered all along the way, and just the opportunities to lead people, which is, is really significant.
And that actually at a really early stage of your career as well. And I think a classic example would be, and in my book I refer to a mission I was on in Iraq where I was leading a 4-ship at night over the border when I was engaged by a surface-to-air missile. My boss was in my formation, and so was my senior executive officer, and so was the squadron weapons instructor, the QI. And suddenly you've got basically your 3 most qualified people on your squadron are your number 2, 3, and 4, but you're the junior pilot. And there's this concept of, when I talk to businesses, that if something goes wrong, then actually the senior person would leap in, but that's not how it works. And we know that even to those basics of just leading a formation of aircraft, the person that's leading continues to lead regardless of what happens in the air. And so actually, if you happen to be the most junior person and you're leading at that moment, you're going to be pushing yourself to your own capabilities. But you know that you can ask for help and ask questions, and they will guide you, but they're not going to take over. And that level of accountability, empowerment sits with you. And that's why I often refer to that as probably the best lesson of leadership is my bosses in that moment, that he still had the ability to stay quiet, to watch it all pan out in front of him, but he didn't get that retractable screwdriver out and start making me do it how he would have done it.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And I think the other aspect of exactly that example is a perfect example is when you are a senior guy in the or lady in the formation in that situation, then in the debrief, you take what's coming to you as well. You own up to, and obviously I spent pretty much all my career in the single seat world where, you generally probably find it rather more difficult to hide things in terms of stuff going on in the cockpit. Whereas there were clearly plenty of opportunities if you're flying a single seat airplane that, you can turn around and go, am I going to fess up to this or not? And the reality is, invariably, it was really good to do it because clearly, you're A, showing you're human, B, you're showing integrity in terms of what's gone on. And quite often what would happen is people they were aware something was going on. They didn't necessarily know all the detail. Yeah. So by being honest yourself, but also open to criticism and comment, and not taking it kind of personally and saying, you can't talk to me that way because I'm the boss. I mean, that's just not the way we operate. As it's a rank off kind of world where, if you'd screwed up, it didn't matter whether you were the squadron commander, station commander, whatever it was, you could expect to be, given short shrift by even the most junior person in the formation if they felt there was a point to be made.
I absolutely, and I love that. That's that concept of leave your stripes at the door. The hierarchy does not come into that debrief. It's a level playing field. Now, it takes quite a lot of guts, admittedly, when you are at the start of your career to call out the station commander who happens to be in that debrief. But I was talking to Helen Seymour, actually, who was the first female Typhoon pilot recently, and she shared a lovely example of this saying of show your tapes. And it was the fact that you might think you're in this single seat world, you can get away with things. But actually that simple phrase, show your tapes, is basically, for anyone that's listening, it would be you're going to take all of any video footage, the tapes, and you're going to show them to the formation. So there is no hiding, even in that single seat world. And actually it's about being really honest. So I remember clearly as well, we were just on a training trip. It was to Spade Adam and the QI would say, the weapons instructor would say to you, okay, Mandy, did you hit the target? And you say, okay, I think I was 3 seconds late I'm going to talk damage. I didn't destroy it because I know I hit it down the right-hand side. And they say, okay, let's see your tapes. And it's really good because it makes you be really honest about your own performance. And actually you can then watch it in action. Now, I know that seems very simple, very simplistic because you've got a tape with evidence. But let's just take that into the commercial world and say, okay, look at your own performance critically and just ask yourself 3 questions. What went well, what went badly, and what can I do more of? I can be even better if, and that's it. If you just run through those 3 things, even at the end of a meeting, at the end of a client call, how could I have handled that better? That's your incremental learning that takes you from average leadership into that high performing space.
No, such a good point. And I think actually debriefing in the broadest possible sense and kind of harvesting the knowledge is something that a lot of, when I worked at Deloitte, it was not an internal Deloitte comment per se, although it did apply to Deloitte as well, but also with a lot of the clients I work with from Deloitte, You jump from one thing to they're busy. They're very busy, very demanding jobs. They jump from one thing to the next thing, and they get to the end of it and they go, hoorah, fine, that's it, move on, next job. And they don't actually take the time to go through, as we would have done in a military environment, where you debrief everything. I mean, there wasn't a sortie I flew ever where we didn't debrief it, unless I was completely on my own. And fine, even then I was debriefing it probably to myself, to turn around and talk it through. And that whole preparation thing. I mean, one of my personal bugbears, for example, is every time I get on an airliner and I'm sat there looking at people not paying attention to the emergency brief. I think that every single sortie I flew for 3,500 hours, I would do an emergency brief, even if I was sat on my own in the airplane before I got airborne, because I needed to know that I had in my head what I was going to do. You all done exactly the same thing. And and that just frustrates me enormously, that people think that it doesn't matter. It's fine. We can just move on. Whereas actually, A, you're wasting so much opportunity, and B, in the emergency brief case, you're putting yourselves and yourself and others at risk by not paying attention to it and being as well equipped as you could be to move through it. No, so really, it's a great conversation, because I think there's so many examples where we can bring some of this stuff to life in a useful way, and it's quite relatable. I think initially people turn around and go, well, actually, what you've done, there's no possible comparison between that and what I do in terms of my corporate world. And the reality is, of course, there's plenty of things you can compare it to.
It's enormous. The crossover is huge. I mean, the debriefing piece in itself is an entire course. In fact, I worked with a great friend during lockdown, actually, and we produced this course on debriefing to a major pharmaceutical company. And it was fantastic, because actually it was like a 2.5-hour event. But they were sort of going, oh, my goodness, we're really learning, giving people a structure to how to debrief. I mean, we always run through that whole, we would call it the central flying schools of teaching, where we would say, the debrief funnel, what happened, the facts, why did it happen, the cause, but most importantly, how can we be better? What's, that's your cure. And if that's what we're taking is, you can take any situation that you've been in the commercial sector and just get 3 points from your timeline, which are non-negotiable, and actually just ask facilitated questions. And we always say, try to stay away from the who, because often there's blame associated with that. So if we can start, just asking the what, where, when, how, and then we're starting to pull out the how can we be better. And every time I speak to a business, they say, oh, yeah, we debrief, we call it a post-mortem. We always do it when something happens, something bad. I'm like, no, just in that whole analogy, post-mortem, negative connotation, make it part of your daily routine, and when you sort of link that into feedback, you want to be high performing. You only ever give people this confidence boosting, you're amazing sort of feedback. That builds confidence, but it's the developmental feedback that builds competence. And if you're wanting a competent crew behind you and a team, you've got to give that developmental feedback as well.
Yeah. And again, while we're on this, I think blame culture and accountability from the top and protecting the team. I mean, there are just so many things in there that, again, I talk about very regularly with people, where I would always take the view that if I've got a team of people, I'm putting an umbrella up over the top of them, and whether it's military time or these days, and the aim of that was to turn around and say, look, I'll protect you as much as I possibly can, as long as you work within what we've asked you to do. You're not breaking the rules. Yeah. And 2, if something goes wrong, you tell me about it before someone else does, because if someone else tells me about it from outside that circle, then it's much, much harder to defend you now in terms of finding an argument that I can marshal. And I've got legions of examples of where that really has made a difference. And I think the other thing is the tone from the top in terms of the blame culture. Yeah. I mean, again, another short military story. I remember when I was a squadron commander, you'll remember the kind of confidential direct occurrence report kind of approach that we had, where you could write safety reports. And again, you talk about this in your book, which I'd obviously been involved in a number of these over the years, but when I was a squadron boss, I very, very nearly had a mid-air collision with my American exchange officer. We were in a 4-ship formation. We were flying up from Coltishall in Norfolk up to at medium level, 16, 18,000 feet, and we were dropping into low level north of Newcastle, Amble Lighthouse. You'll know it well, I'm sure.
Oh yes.
And it was all quite tactical stuff. We were trying to mask ourselves from the threat. We were working therefore in very tight formation. And I was on the inside of my American as the number 2 in the formation. He was leading the 4-ship, the 2 further behind us. And he called a manual frequency change, which I then needed to go, change the numbers on the radio. And as he did it, he didn't think about it, and I don't blame him for it. It's my fault. He almost simultaneously turned hard down to take us down to low level. So I looked up from changing the first digit on my radio because I was being relatively diligent about paying attention to it, and I had a windscreen full of Jaguar, and it was really close. I mean, it was really properly close. And I was a bit of a heart-stopping moment. But then again, I don't think he'd seen this. In fact, I'm pretty sure from the debrief he hadn't seen it at all. But I wrote a report on this. And of course, the bottom, you'll remember those reports where you write the report and then there's squadron commander's comments and then station commander's comments. And so the squadron commander's comments, my one-liner was, "I am the squadron commander." And because it makes such a difference, because you turn around, you're setting a tone from it doesn't matter whether it's a commercial organization or anything else. You're setting a tone about your behavior and what's acceptable and what's not, and what people can turn around, how empowered they then feel to potentially talk about stuff they've done, so everyone learns, which I think is a great thing.
Yeah, and I've got a lovely example of that, actually. I was working with the police force, actually. This is after leaving, and I did quite a lot of work sort of in facilitation, and I was doing a 2.5-hour sort of session with it's quite a lot of the senior team from across 2 different forces, and we'd met them, Surrey and Sussex. We got them all together in the room, and my first question was, "Who's made a mistake?" And it was like deathly silence, tumbleweed blowing. And I wanted that. I wanted there to be this level of uncomfort of talking about mistakes. And then we went on to talk about what is a just culture, how we've actually got this statement that it's about competent professionals making mistakes and developing unhealthy norms, but there's zero tolerance for recklessness. So, we got this line in the sand, and we're now talking about anything to the left of that. We want to know about it. We talked about the sort of the accident rate, and the when you look at all of the studies that have been done, for every one major event, you will have 30 minor events, but there'll be 300 near misses. Now, traditionally, if you've got the wrong culture, you're always going to find out about the one, because it's going to bite you, and someone's in our world is often dead. But if we find out about and we're always therefore reacting to things. But actually, more importantly, is if we can capture our 300 near misses when we got away with it and there was no negative outcome, you're now going to create a learning culture, because we can now create responses. We can work out where our risks are and our threats are. And I said, so these are really brilliant learning opportunities. I mean, let's call them 300 events. And as we'd gone through this, the last session, I said, okay, guys, who's got any really brilliant 300 events? Work on your tables. I could not stop them talking. The room went wild. Everyone was sharing brilliant learning opportunities. And I was like, if we could just clarify, they were all the same as we asked in the very first statement when I said, who's made a mistake? We've now reframed it in our thinking, and we're calling it a 300 event. And what was really lovely was I went into a couple of different HQs around the area after that, and they put it on their board. And they made it, as you walked into that station, it was a big triangle. It just had a big circle. It said, what's been your latest 300 event? And they brought it as an agenda item as well. And if anyone could set the tone, it was almost like, who's had a brilliant 300 event they want to share? Suddenly just changing that mindset into a learning culture. And it was really, fabulous. Really powerful. It's so simple and so powerful.
No, that is really, as you say, that's a really great example, and so true. And I think that learning culture and kind of blame-free culture, aviation, actually, I think not just military aviation, I think civil aviation's gone a long way in this direction for a long time and set the example, which is really encouraging. But there are plenty of others that still need to do that.
I mean, there are some really good books out there as well. I mean, Black Box Thinking with Matthew Said was a book that I think was really powerful in actually looking at that learning culture, learning from failure. And he used so many excellent examples in that one, really, of just that sort of retrospective culture of saying something happened. Why do we always just have to be looking in our rearview mirror? Let's start to be more proactive about that. Yeah,
no, fantastic. Hey, that's a really, I hadn't expected that conversation. That's a really good one. Taking it back to Mandy Hickson, though.
Oh, yeah.
Really interesting subject. It's a very interesting subject. You've had a fabulous fabulous set of adventures over your time. But when you look back, if you were advising school age Mandy now, what would you say to school age Mandy?
I think it's quite an easy one because I get contacted almost daily on all the different social media platforms by young Mandy aged youngsters, be them men, women, boys and girls. And they always say, what would you do if you were in my shoes? And the answer is, I would take every opportunity that is available to you. So it doesn't always have to be that you join the cadets. It doesn't have to be that. But the generic advice is believe in yourself, believe that you are a person that can make it. My mum always said, if it's going to be someone, why shouldn't it be you? And that's a really good sort of piece of advice, because they could say, oh, but 4,000 people are applying. Yeah. But if it's going to be one of those 4,000, why shouldn't that be you, Mandy? And I think that's the whole point is, often, while we're at school age, you need to be thinking, if you do want a career and you do want to be successful in that career, you've got to put yourself forward to be the sports captain, be it, the head girl, whatever it is take every opportunity that you can so that you can build your own confidence. And therefore, you're going to be building who you are and what you can bring to the equation. So I always say, believe in yourself, be true to yourself. Don't ever pretend to be someone you're not, and find your passion. Because if you can make your career your passion, you're never going to have to work another day.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a very powerful point, and one that I use a lot as well about enjoying what you do. I tend to say to people, look, if you're not enjoying what you do, find some way to change it. You don't want to get to be my age and suddenly wish you'd done something else. I mean, that's just foolish to put yourself in that. And the other end of that example of yours that I tend to use a lot as well is don't shut doors you don't need to shut. Yeah. Because quite often if stuff goes wrong, it doesn't go quite your way, then people can leave things or close off things in a way that makes it quite difficult to go back down that path where actually you may want to do that. And that's true with relationships and all sorts of things, to be honest.
We do.
Just need to be careful.
Yeah, we do. And I think with that, I think there's something about that whole giving back, that it's about constantly looking at your relationships and actually feeding them forwards, isn't it? So, a classic example as well on that side of things would be when I left, I left the Air Force. I'm now doing what I'm doing. I've been doing it for 12 years. And there's a whole group of women that are leaving the Air Force sort of more recently than myself. And they're all sort of looking at this world of sort of speaking or facilitation or coaching and saying, could I go into it? And I'm saying, absolutely. So, two former fast jet friends of mine, or I didn't actually know them in the Air Force actually at all, reached out and said, Mandy, would you listen to our keynote speech? And I said, absolutely. And I sat there and I had 7 pages of feedback for them because I've been doing it for 12 years. And they were like, I can't believe you're doing this for us. I was like, well, why wouldn't I? And they said, I genuinely believe there's so many slices of pie out there. I've probably helped now about 6 or 7 different keynote speakers, but mainly ex-military, refine their speech, make it so that it's punchy, make it sure that it's commercially viable, that it's relevant to the corporate world. Because you can take your own experience and it's great just telling the story, but what's your key takeaway? Mm-hmm. And that's what I've probably learned more than anything over the last 12 years is don't just spin your yarn, that's fine. But the power of the storytelling is your most powerful tool to get your key takeaway in there. People will remember the story and they'll remember the takeaway. But, my point there is about actually pay it forward. If you've got something and it's going well, pay it forward. Help other people come on your journey with you.
Yeah, totally. And on a slightly different vein, I suppose, I've done a lot of that with military transition generally, where, I jumped from the Air Force into Deloitte. Lots of people were kind of going, wow, how'd you do that? And and so I've had innumerable numbers of those conversations in the last 9 years since I left. And some of whom have been kind of in the, here's a job, how do I get a job, with you guys? Which is probably less helpful. Some of them have been much more around the kind of, the things that, apart from anything else, the mistakes I made, the things I've learned, the way I would handle it differently if I was had my time again and all that sort of thing, which I think is immensely useful. And, it's true for pretty much every aspect of life, to be honest. It's about feeding stuff back, giving stuff back. So you're actually, helping the next generation of people behind you in whatever form not have to make the same mistakes you made, and that hopefully is is a better way for everyone that goes there.
Can I pick up on that then, Bob? And I know this is obviously your podcast, but are there any things that you would go back in that transition and actually change the way that you did something? Because I think that is a really good piece of advice to anybody, isn't it? And to look back and say, actually, I would have done this slightly differently.
Yeah, I think I was probably a bit naive in terms of when I started looking at what I was going to do. I can vividly remember an early conversation with a headhunter, because obviously I was leaving as a an Air Vice Marshal as a 2-star, so I was sort of looking at relatively senior roles. And I sat down with this guy, and I'd given him my CV in advance and that sort of thing. And he was pretty frank. He said, the thing for you is you're always going to be, probably not a very politically correct way of putting it, but he said, you'll always be the bridesmaid in my search, is never going to be the bride. And I kind of looked at him slightly quizzically. And he said, because you don't have the commercial experience yet, you need to get that. That's where you need to get to. And he said, so what are you interested in? And, and I said, well, I've done all these different things. You've seen from my CV, the kind of stuff that I've done. And, I've got lots of different experiences and skills. So I'm kind of pretty much open to, there's not much I wouldn't turn my hand to be honest. And he looked at me and just smiled. He said, it doesn't work like that. No, you have to be much more focused in terms of which sectors, which industries, potentially even which companies you're really going to look at. And you're going to really have to start dialing into that and being much more focused around those kind of areas. And it was hugely useful advice. And the other bit of advice that I got that was very powerful to me was from one of the Deloitte partners who I'm still well and truly in touch with, who helped me get into Deloitte, who looked at, we were having coffee and talking about potential prospects. And he looked at my CV, which is a pretty typical military CV, and I reversed timeline and all the rest of it, where looking back across what had been by any measure a pretty successful career. And he said, what you now need to do is you need to think about how you monetize what you've done in the past for me in this organization in areas where we don't already have that. And I think that was a very major turning point for me in terms of thinking about forward looking rather than rearward looking. It's not about what I've done. It's about what I'm going to do and how am I going to get there to be able to do that. And what else do I need to do for myself in order to upskill myself and so on. So, I mean, I think there's a couple of points, but I think there's tons of stuff that is out there. And again, one of the things I think is nice about the military community in general has been that, we stick together and we do help each other. And we're, to your point about helping people with keynote speeches and so on and so forth, that is so typically altruistic about the way we operate, because, you can take the individual out of the military, but you can't take the military out of them. That's the cliche, and it's very, very true. I've had a couple of people in those sort of transition conversations who pretty senior ones who've come up to me and basically been, well, yeah, but I'm bound to get a job. I've look at what I've done, and look at the rank I am, and that sort of thing. And I went, it counts for nothing. The sooner you get that out of your head, the better. This is, no one cares what rank you were or what decorations you have or whatever else. Frankly, it's a great coffee table conversation, and it's a nice intro to to lots of things. But the reality is, you've got to get past that pretty quickly, because you're otherwise you're going to find it difficult.
And I think, that pure point there actually just really leads me into another sort of stream of thought for myself, is that, it's one of the sort of things I've always looked back on and thought, if I had stayed in the Air Force, where would I have gone? How far would I have gone? And I've always been a little bit disappointed, I'll be honest, that I never got promoted, because I didn't do the right jobs. Because once I'd had children, I chose to take a job that actually my posting officer, who happened to be ended up as the head of the Air Force, but he actually said to me, if you take that job, you'll never be promoted, Mandy. And I said, but I don't feel I've got a choice. The Tornado's deploying back to Afghanistan. Otherwise, I'm going to Valley as an instructor, but I'm breastfeeding a 4-month-old baby and my husband's flying out of Gatwick. What am I going to do? And it's that whole feeling of, actually, when I'm asked, well, what rank did you get to? And I said, I was just a flight lieutenant. I can feel myself saying, I was just a flight lieutenant. And it's almost frustrates me in some ways, if I'm really honest, is that it's always been something that's not quite closed the circle for me, because, it doesn't matter how successful I've been in the outside world. In the military, I just still think, I still have imposter syndrome, because I just think, I go back and I think, I was just a flight lieutenant. Really, what am I bringing to the equation? And it's that's a lack of self, almost because we know how rank orientated it is in the military, and therefore it really matters. But it was interesting for you to say, it doesn't matter what your rank was in the outside world. And I suppose I proved that point really in some ways.
Have you ever? I mean, so we were joking in a Twitter exchange the other day, weren't we? I mean, I think I'm the one going to be saluting you soon. I mean, when you look at what you've achieved, I mean, you are absolutely proof positive of that. You know, you have done a huge amount in a relatively short period of time, to be honest, since you left. And, you know, more power to you. And I think you have really taken everything that was good about what you did in a challenging time in the Air Force with some really challenging roles, and, you know, and then turned that into a very, very powerful business proposition. So too right, people should be paying attention to what you did and so on. And I think the rank thing is, I understand why you say that. I absolutely understand that. But it's kind of almost in coaching terms, it's back to limiting belief type thing, isn't it? It's not relevant.
Completely.
It's not relevant.
But it's still there. Yeah. It is still there. And it's really, so, you know, when you reached out and said, you know, would I come on the podcast? I'll be honest, I said to my husband, oh gosh, I'm going to be a bit embarrassed. You know, it's almost like, what lessons, you know, am I bringing? And he said, oh, Mandy, you've proved yourself quite a lot, you know, in the commercial sector. But it's that first thing. And if I get invited back, you know, I've been invited now to speak to so many different stations for their Battle of Britain dinners or commemorative events as their keynote speaker. And I always feel myself going, oh gosh, I really don't want to do that one because they're going to find me out. And this is where when people say, oh, you don't have imposter syndrome, Mandy, of course you don't. I say, no, I do. That's where it is. It's in the military environment where I think I'm going back in. I was just a flight lieutenant. And it's this ridiculousness. But it's still there, and it takes a lot to try and get rid of that feeling, I'll be honest.
Yeah, I can imagine it does. But interestingly, without turning the podcast into a coaching conversation.
Coaching counselling session. I'm sorry, I'm going to start crying in a bit.
I think when you look at, I mean, the vast majority of people in the Air Force, of course, are, a flight lieutenant or below. If you're just taking the Air Force. Sure. And so actually your story and your success and what you achieved is of huge relevance to all of them, because an awful lot of them are going to be in a leaving in a similar position, looking for how do I make some opportunities, and I think you are a fabulous, I was going to ask you about role models in a minute, but I think you are a fabulous role model to an awful lot of people who are looking at what their next step is, what's their next chapter going to look like beyond the military, but also not just in the military, just looking at what you achieved if you're looking from a commercial world into Mandy Hickson and where you've got to as a human being. I think you're an amazing role model for all of that. So I think you should be less concerned about that, to be honest.
Yeah, no, and don't worry, I'm not going to start weeping on you. But no, it was just an interesting reflection, really, on that. Just reflecting back to the piece that you said of, that rear view mirror of we look at what we achieved in the military and we feel that should pan forward into the commercial sector, and it doesn't, is what we're saying.
Yeah, no, completely so. So anyway, on role models, who've you really kind of living or dead here? I mean, I'm not, you obviously mentioned some family ones and so on already, I suspect, but other people that you really think have shaped and developed your career and and that have been people you've looked up to.
So someone, that I do reflect on that literally was quite pivotal in changing my career was that boss of the University Air Squadron. So he was just a squadron leader, middle management sort of thing, if you think about it. But he absolutely did what he said he was going to do. He believed in his people, the people, these University Air Squadron, cadets, and we're all sort of in our 20s, early 20s or late teens, really. And yet he went to bat for us. And, and he literally didn't just stop there by saying, well, it's not right, and gave up. He got external examiners to come in flying with me. He looked into the testing system. He encouraged me. He forced them to give me another test straight away, which is, no one would do that. He flew me up there to do the test. So he didn't just talk. He absolutely walked it. And, the respect that we all have for him was immeasurable. And we still do now. I mean, it's really interesting. I saw, an exchange on one of our Facebook groups from our University Air Squadron. It was someone said, oh, I've got this problem with my ears. He's like, let me come and help you out. I've got the contact for you. And they were like, oh, you're still there helping us. So he was quite instrumental for myself. But I think it's also been quite interesting sort of when I look at, say, not just positive role models, but I've had the occasional boss where I've thought, you're not a great role model. And I see that leadership style and I think, I don't want to do it like that. And I think that can be just as powerful in some ways to actually pick up on the negative behaviors that you think there is no way in the world that I want to be anything like that. And so, yeah, I've been very lucky in many ways to have some very, very powerful, basically on my squadron, I had Steve Hillier and Mike Wigston, who ended up being the heads of the Air Force. So that was the boss and his deputy who ended up being, in that same, they were my role models when I was sort of front line flying, which was great to have that sort of level of leadership that I could look up to at that stage as well. But I've had, people outside of that world as well. And, it can come from different areas as well. Someone that is another great role model for myself is a great friend of mine, Matt, who was one of the first openly gay pilots in the Air Force. And, he is doing so much in the space which he's working in as well. And, I helped him initially get into the speaking world. Well, he's taking it by storm, but it's not just him doing it as a speaker, but he's actually got a lot of other issues that he's really working behind the scenes as well. And I think, there is this feeling of we have a responsibility. And I think the people that are role models to myself are the people that take that very, very seriously. And they don't want just to ensure that they've gone up the ladder, but the ladder is welded down and then others can stream up behind it. And they're the people that I tend to absolutely admire.
Yeah, that's really, again, very powerful points. I think the welding the ladder down thing, I mean, the other type of leaders I've seen occasionally are people that have, they haven't really used the ladder. They've climbed up on the shoulders of the people below them and haven't given them any credit either. And I, again, really interesting how similar your thought processes are to mine, because my own personal leadership style I talk about quite a lot has been built on nicking things from people that I like, and I like what they've done, and saying, actually, do you know what? I'm going to mirror that behavior because that really suits me. And equally turning around and having another jar, if you like, that I put stuff in that I'm never, ever going to do that. I don't want to tolerate that behavior in myself or in anybody else that's around me. And I think that's how you learn and how you develop. And I think being quite open about that as a relatively junior, inexperienced, person in a leadership position, it's important to yourself to turn around and go, how am I going to develop? How do I want to do this? And it's quite powerful if you get the right examples that you can build on. And to your point, I think good examples and bad examples are both useful. Hopefully, you have more good ones than bad ones. But for sure. Looking back though, across your career, and I kind of do this highs and lows thing. What do you wish, and this is what you've done since the Air Force and in the Air Force, what do you wish you'd done differently and why?
I suppose the Air Force time, it would be not perhaps being more politically minded. So just accepting the status quo. And I talk about that really of I think, there was reasons behind it. So, for example, when I was on the squadron, I actually miscarried a baby, and then due to the fact I didn't know I was pregnant, carried on flying. And then, of course, it's never going to be good. And it was the squadron's 90th birthday as well. So I was organising that. So talk about pressure. I had to park that. That happened on the Friday. And then I basically hosted an entire weekend of entertainment at Marham for the whole weekend. And,
oh, wow.
But what I'm saying is, so I then carried on flying again, but I actually realized that, I probably needed to go into a ground job if I did want to actually, and I was coming to the end of my tour. So I moved into a ground job, had 2 children in very quick succession, which was great because it was a very productive ground tour. And it was the end of that really, that I really wish in some ways I'd perhaps been a little bit more forthright in how I'd handled it, because it was that feeling of, what are my options? Okay, back to frontline, back to this. And if you take this job, as I was told, you'll never be promoted. And I wish in some ways I'd challenged that a little bit more and said, I wonder if I had done and had been more vocal, really, whether we would have been more agile and actually sped up the process for so many people following my footsteps, which actually COVID brought in, working from home, sabbaticals being taken, options for people to take career breaks, all of these little things. I just wonder if I had been more vocal at this point where I was told, you'll never be promoted. Why didn't I challenge that a bit more? Mm-hmm. Why didn't I actually say, hold on a minute, you know what, if you want women in, Not one person had a conversation with me when I said I'm going to leave. You've spent 3.7 million training me. Now, admittedly, I might not want to do a frontline job and be fast jet flying when my children are 2 and 3, but maybe I will when they are 6 and 7, or just give me a bit of breathing space. But there was no option for that. It was just, you've hit the end and that's it. And I sometimes wonder if perhaps I had been a little bit more savvy, used my voice to my advantage at that point. But I think I was just so used to the fact that you're told what to do and then you got on with it. And it's only with the rose-coloured tinted spectacles of being able to look back with that hindsight to say, you know what, Mandy, you have been able to use your voice so much more outside of the Air Force. Why didn't you use it when you're within the Air Force to create that positive change?
Yeah, I was really sorry about the miscarriage. That's tough. I mean, it says an awful lot about your carrier. Yeah, it is. It says a lot about your character, though, that you kind of compartmentalize it. I think it's another trait that I think a lot of us have. We're very good at. It's quite poignant in your book when you talked about there's a chapter in there where you're talking about 3 fatalities in pretty quick succession.
Oh,
and of course, I had that on steroids in the early days of my career, where we were losing a lot more people, and I can remember. When I was at basic training at Linton and flying the Jet Provost at the time, and the display pilot crashed on the airfield at the end of the day and was killed. And the next day, we all went into work, and the wreckage was all still strewn across the airfield, and the ejection seat was still there, albeit covered up, and because obviously he hadn't ejected it, but they'd taken him out of it. But the chief instructor just standing up at the front of the Met brief and saying, "Right, okay, guys, welcome to the Air Force," because it was all guys at that point. Welcome to the Air Force. That's the way it is. That's what happens. Taxi pattern today is a bit different because we obviously got to avoid this, and off we go. And you kind of go, whoa. That was, that it did make it very real. And of course, then subsequently, you had quite a lot of those kind of events over the next few years. And certainly in the Jaguar Force, there were a good number of people that we buried before my time, even more so, where the airplane was ergonomically quite challenged and things. So I think you do get quite good at compartmenting that. But that kind of personal thing, I think, is very tough, and is one of the sort of challenges that is hard to navigate. No, it's a really, really interesting point. I think my reflection on what you've just said would be, I think I can understand why you feel that way, and that makes an awful lot of sense. And the journey is still continuing, if you like. I mean, we talked about before we came on air. I mean, when I was out in Germany in the 1980s, I mean, we were still, if you were a woman in the Air Force, obviously not flying because there were no flying roles at that stage. But even in a non-flying role, you became pregnant, you had to leave. That was it.
Yeah.
There was, and which is, when you look back on it, it's just completely extraordinary. And of course, there was some subsequent legal action and big compensation payments and all that sort of thing. But it's terrible and so we are well down the road from that. But there's a way to go for sure. What about high point, Mandy? What's the best thing ever for you?
Gosh, I mean, there's been so many, and it's hard to actually pick one, but I think a moment that will always stick in my mind, and it sort of ties in probably to what I'm passionate about now, which is that sort of legacy side of things, is I'd qualified, I was flying fast jets, and I was on the squadron, and I was invited back. I'd been involved in the Duke of Edinburgh's awards scheme when I was within the Air Cadets, and also within the Ventures and Rangers that I was part of as well. And I was invited back to hand out all of the awards in the palace, basically. And I found myself in the throne room. And it was one of those sort of stopping moments. I was in my uniform, I had my wings on my chest, some medals, and I was the one doing a speech at the front. I was the one that was handing out all the awards to the Gold Award winners. And in the other room, there was Gary Lineker, and in the other room, there was somebody else. But I was in the throne room. So they'd put me in this sort of pride of place. And it was that moment of sort of circle where I thought, I think these are all little bits that you see. I was still serving then, but that was such a pivotal moment for myself, just realizing that putting back in, that completing of the circle, that creating legacy for future generations, so that you realize people can see you, you're visible, and therefore they can, actually follow in your footsteps. And I think that probably was one of the many, many incredibly proud moments. And I'll just touch on another one, which is a very quick one, which was when I graduated as an officer. Obviously graduation day, you're at Cranwell, it's a spectacular day. I think you were allowed 2 guests, and they allowed me, it happened to be on the exact day, my grandpa's 90th birthday. And what a wonderful moment that he was invited as the guest of honor to hand out all of the awards. So former wing commander, former pilot from the Second World War, and he stood there with all his medals on the podium, and he handed out the awards on his 90th birthday. And that was, again, that feeling of, I've joined the military, you can pay me any amount of money, but in that simple action, you have bought my loyalty because you're showing me that the military, the Air Force is this family, and it's a family that I want to be part of. And you're just as honoured in your position as a 90-year-old veteran as you are as a youngster that's just joining.
Yeah, that's a lovely story. Fantastic. That must have been a tremendous day.
Yeah, it really was.
Yeah, absolutely extraordinary. Wow, what a proud moment. Sadly, for every high, there's probably a low. What's the low point?
I think the low point was first tour in Iraq on the squadron, when actually one individual decided to make my life rather unpleasant, and he started to bully me. And I'd worked so hard. I mean, against every sort of barrier. I'd got here. I was doing my first operational tour. I'd only got to the squadron in the beginning of December, end of November, and we deployed in the February, and we'd been to Red Flag in the middle. So I'd actually, it was that whirlwind of getting attack combat ready to get out there on the squadron to go and deploy to Iraq. And then this guy decided that he would bully me. And I was the only woman out there, so it was incredibly isolating. I hadn't really thought it through, because if you're going to be the first, you're going to be one of the only. And that is quite lonely, I'll be honest. And yeah, every single time I walk out, the conversations would stop. Every question in any brief came to me, not the other junior pilots that were all with me. And he just made me uncomfortable all the time. And actually got to the point where I remember a conversation home where I rang my boyfriend, who's not my husband, and I said, this is it. I'm going to leave. I do not want to be part of this military. This is not the one I joined. I cannot believe how unhappy I am and how much I hate it. And he said, Mandy, don't let one person take you down. And actually, he gave me the most incredible piece of advice then, just like, head down, we'll deal with it when you get back. And I did. And when we got back, he made me practice all these conversations. I was like to say role playing, but it sounds like it's a bit dodgy, but role playing these difficult conversations so that when the opportunity came for me to actually bring it up with him, I would feel I had the skill set and the tools to be able to have that conversation. And I did. And it arose. It was actually in a bar, and his wife was there. But, and I just said, oh, you were aware that you made my life a living hell for 4 months? And he just said, what? And his wife looked at me and was like, what? Why did you do that to Mandy? And actually, when I told her everything that had happened based on fact, not emotion, which is really, really important for those difficult conversations, he reflected on it. He came back on the Monday morning. He said, Mandy, can you come into my office? I thought, oh, gosh, I'm in trouble. And he just said, you are absolutely 100% spot on. You are right. I did exactly what you described at every single stage. And I think it was because I'd focused on evidence-based behaviours. There was no negotiating what he did, because he did those. I didn't focus on how it made me felt. I just tried to focus on the facts. And it was a really low point. And actually, we then did get on really quite well. But I have heard subsequently that he has gone on and bullied other people since, which is really very, very sad to hear.
Yeah, that's disappointing, because I was going to say before you said that, actually, one of the things I think that's often the case in my experience is when you do have the courage of your convictions to call out some of this behavior, sometimes, not always, sometimes it's actually just accidental. Individuals haven't, they just haven't thought about the impact they're having. They haven't thought about their behavior and so on. I mean, clearly in that case, that doesn't sound the case, and that's sort of shame.
At least it enabled us to have a really good working relationship while I was on that squadron, which we did. But it was literally at a reunion recently where I went and they said, oh, he's up to his old tricks. He's doing exactly the same. I thought, a leopard doesn't change their spots. But at least it enabled me to get closure on that and to thrive in the environment that I was then in, because he was not going to do it to me anymore.
Yeah, good for you for confronting it as well. I mean, not everybody does.
I think on the flip side of that as well, Bob, I'd like to just say that was the only episode in 17 years of full-time service where I had any issues whatsoever. And I think you're always going to have one. There's always going to be a bad apple. There's always going to be a pocket. And it certainly didn't put a slant on my experiences of my time in the military, my time in the Air Force, which is why I still talk about it in such a positive light.
That's also good to hear. And I think, to be honest, it's a truism that, this is not a gender specific thing. I mean, there are plenty of, for sure, I know, and well, I've been in this situation myself, where in a longer career where you clearly have points where, you meet individuals and so on that frankly are just toxic, and and you just have to find ways to navigate that. So it's not unique, but, good. No, I mean, the rest, as they say, is history, because we'll get to that future looking bit in a minute. But just before we do that, work-life balance. I'm really interested in we've both been through the kind of same meat grinder of a world, and now out in the commercial world, where I think there is still a ton of pressure on people these days, and often they're not thinking necessarily about how they might balance everything that is there. I know some people don't like the term work-life balance, just talk about life balance and so on these days. But what do you do? What's your sort of top tips?
I like to say it's a blend, actually. Yeah. So my top tips are routine. I have no routine whatsoever, which is really annoying. So when I say, when we looked at lockdown, for example, we were in this rigid routine of, we're going to use this for our exercise time, we're going to do this for that. And it actually really helped on my mental health side of things. But every single day in my working life at the moment is different. I'm flying off all over the world doing speeches. I'm do podcasts, but one thing I always do wherever I am is I take my trainers and I get out in the fresh air, and I just do a walk normally. It doesn't have to be, it's not a run for me. I'm not, I've got a bad back, so I don't run particularly, but I will always walk, and I will always exercise. So, this morning I didn't want to do it. I woke up and I thought, I don't want to go spinning. And it was pouring with rain. And actually, I put a post out, a little film on Twitter with me in my dressing gown going, I'm so northern, I refuse to pay the late cancelling fee. So that's why I went. But it's whatever spurs you on. But that feeling of the exercise, and it's just, when I do go out, I never take my electrics with me as well, which is really important. So if I'm in the fresh air, my walk is my time. And it's when actually I come up with every single solution, because I'm not distracted. I love walking as well, whether it be with my friends or my husband or by myself, actually. And I never listen to music either. It's almost like a sort of, I can go into that meditative state and I come up with all my solutions to any of the issues that are going on.
No, that's a great tip. Interestingly, I put a LinkedIn post out a while ago about exactly this. Take time for yourself to reflect and just declutter your mind. And I do, because we've got dogs, so I walk the dogs quite regularly.
Yeah. Oh, you've got your black labs.
Yeah.
We had a black lab.
Two boys, and they're great. I mean, they're fantastic fun to take out and about. But I do listen to podcasts sometimes. I listen to music sometimes, but I also have times when I do exactly what you do. I just turn around and go, do you know what? I'm just going to think about stuff today. I think it's great. I'm amused by your, always take my trainers. I used to do that. I used to take sports kit everywhere I went. 99% of the time, the only exercise I got was actually the lifting the sports kit in the bag and bringing it back home again at the end of it. So I've kind of a bit more flexible about how I do that now. But no.
Yeah, no, it's that trainers. If the trainers are there and then I see them, I think, oh, come on, Mandy, just do it. But it's interesting. So I listen to loads of podcasts and audiobooks, and I love it. But I always do that now on journeys. So if I'm driving somewhere or I'm on the train, that's what I'll do. But that walk, I don't do that on because I don't know why. It's just that feeling of being surrounded by nature, but also just, it's almost just decompression. It really is. And it's like you're not putting anything additional into your brain. And it's amazing how you come up with all the issues and solutions at that point.
I was driving the other day listening to an audiobook by some lady called Mandy Hickson, and I nearly had to stop because I was laughing so hard because there's so many things that are just exactly as I remember it. And it was a real kind of memory jogger for me to take me back down memory lane for lots and lots of things that happened to me.
Someone said to me, please tell me that your laugh is in it, Mandy, because I have, you've just heard, sorry, I've got a terrible laugh, and I'm known as like the foghorn and or a sea lion in distress. But everyone said, is the laugh in the book? And I didn't do it, actually. At one point I heard myself doing it and I caught it because I was trying to be more professional.
The audiobook is great because you do really bring it to life. I mean, it's fabulous, I think, from that point of view. Talking of your kind of future, where you are now, I mean, I've got to applaud you. I mean, you're kind of the other day when I saw I think it was you tweeted it out, where you've appeared in the list of the top 20 speakers for the motivational speakers for the UK. And I kind of, oh, who else is on this list then? And I kind of had looked down and I go, oh my God, there's a sort of who's who of big hitting speakers there. So, I mean, that's amazing that you've got to that level, and absolute credit to you for achieving it. I'm just interested as well how you found yourself in that world. One, and what you get from it as well, because I know the reason for the question is I find these days with what I do with leadership training, it's massively energizing for me. I really enjoy the fact, particularly when I work a lot with Deloitte University, I do courses with young senior managers and young directors who are hugely enthusiastic, hugely ambitious, very bright, and very, very energetic, and that is really good. I mean, is that what's the story for you?
Yeah, so to the first part of the question, how I got into it, drunk at a dinner party. Let's just be honest. No, I was telling a story at a dinner party, and there was a guy that runs a guy called Harvey, actually, and he was married to one of my great friends from university, and I was just telling a story about being shot at in Iraq, as you do when you're a little bit too much red wine. And he said, this would make a brilliant keynote speech or like a motivational speech or after dinner. And I said, what even does that mean? And he said, well, at a conference. And I thought, well, I've never been to a conference at that point. And so he said, okay, well, I'll tell you what, I've got a conference coming up at Brocket Hall in Hertfordshire. It's to 20 leaders from the insurance industry. And I want a session on risk and decision-making under pressure. Could you do it? And I was like, yeah, of course I can. And I've always been that person who says yes to stuff and then regrets it afterwards. Yes, of course. Oh, God, why did I say it? Anyway, so then I spent the whole summer sort of designing this speech around it. And then I stood there with my cards and I had it written down. And they said, oh my God, the story's phenomenal, but why are you reading it from cards? It's your story. I was like, and I've never, ever had my speech written down since then, ever. And I went to see another speaker called Alan Chambers, who was an ex-Royal Marine Arctic explorer. And I went to him at the end. I said, oh my gosh, that's phenomenal. How did you do it? And he said, what advice can you give me? And he said, one piece of advice. I thought, well, I hope it's the name of an agent. And he said, be yourself. And I just thought, actually, do you know what? I've just spent 2 years doing my commercial pilot's licenses. I've just tried to do this world where I didn't really want to go into it. And in this moment, be yourself. When I reflected on it, I thought that probably is the most important thing. And what is the one comment I get on every single speech is, my God, you're authentic. You are exactly the same off the stage as you are on the stage. You are, a woman came up to me outside Winchester Station when I got off my bike outside off the train the other day. And she went, excuse me, are you Mandy Hickson? I've listened to all your podcasts. And I said, oh my God, thanks for coming over. She said, I knew you would say that because I just knew you'd be the same as you are on the pod. And I thought, that's actually really nice for me to think, what I had hoped to achieve in that world, I am that same person. I am exactly the same person as I was when I was in the military. I'm the same person now. And I do get a huge amount from it. I mean, so long as you put the effort in, every single performance, you are only as good as your last event. And it was interesting. I was actually speaking to British Aerospace the other day up in Preston. It was pouring with rain. It was horrible. And it was really disgusting weather. And it was to the future combat system that's being devised. And they've got a massive challenge ahead of them with regards to timings to get it done by 2035. And I was speaking to all of their team, about 250 of them in the room, and I just thought, are they going to be thinking, here's some fast jet pilot just talking about how great she is or whatever it is. And I didn't. I really tailored it to what they wanted, what the important things about how important they are in our chain as well. When you talk about 2,000 people launching an aircraft into one on the front line, they're in that chain. They are one of the 2,000. And actually, I had people weeping at the end, coming up to me, crying. The managing director of that project has sent me the most overwhelming email I have ever received on feedback of just, you have made a monumental difference to our team. You have put a face behind why we're doing it. You have literally given the energy to everyone to take this from an engineering project to making a difference. And that's what you get. It's not, you're not just standing there telling the same story. Yeah, you might say, well, she tells the same story, but ultimately you're getting this amazing energy from it, which you're giving to people. And I wonder why I'm a bit tired in the evening. If I've done 2 or 3 events in one day, I come back and go, I'm a bit tired. I don't know why. And my husband's like, well, Mans, you do give quite a lot of energy, And I think that's important, but I do gain a lot of energy back. And even if I was feeling perhaps when I arrived at that event, gosh, I feel a bit tired. Am I going to be able to up my game for this? Yes, you are. And I always take myself to the toilet. I always focus. I come out and I say, tonight, Matthew, I'm going to be confident, energetic, and then I leave any negativity behind. And then I always feel great afterwards, because I think you do thrive on other people's energy as well.
Yeah, it's very similar actually to some of the facilitation work I do, where it is quite draining. I mean, you get to the end of the day and you think, gosh, because you give it a lot. You're exhausted. It's definitely, it's challenging. No, that's fabulous. Hey, look, so a book under your belt, vibrant speaking career. What's next for Mandy Hickson then?
Halfway through writing book 2. I'm writing it with my husband. It sort of came out of the fact that we just constantly were, he's ex-Navy. Can't have everything. But they do look good in the uniform. I'm allowed to say that. Politically, I'm not allowed anymore. It's not woke. But yeah, so then he went on to the airlines, and he's now one of the most sort of qualified training captains, teaching people to fly the Airbus. And I think we would often be talking about all the human factor side of things, about fear of failure, about imposter syndrome, about all of these things. And we come at it from a really different viewpoint. He's an introvert. I'm an extrovert. He's a plan to the nth degree. I'm a play now, work later sort of person. And I really am a lastminute.com. And if his, bags are not by the front door on the day before he's going somewhere, I'm thinking, what's going on? I'm packing sort of the night before thinking, oh my God, I'm going away. So we're really different, but it really works. We've been together since I was 21. So, well, gosh, a long time. And I think when we look at that, we realize that there was so much that we could share on how we look at every issue that comes across in a human factors perspective, but also in life perspective. Things like, challenging status quo, dilemma. How do you handle that? Decision making. He'll take it from one way, I'll take it from the other. And so we're putting this book together, really, which looks at our very, very different perspectives on life and on issues. And it should be quite interesting.
Well, I look forward to it. If it's half as good at the first one, it'll be great. That's for sure. That'll be fantastic. Almost the very last question. There's 2 questions I always tend to ask people. You may already have covered this, I guess, but it depends whether it's the same thing. What's the most memorable event of your career/life so far?
Well, I've covered the Air Force one. Let's think about one, though, that's been such a privilege. Oh, I can tell you what, which is really bizarre, isn't it? But it's funny how it's like, can be the smallest thing. I think meeting Tom Cruise was quite memorable for me, actually. I met him at React.
Yeah, I saw the picture.
Which was fabulous. And I was with Mike Wigston, with Wiggy, and he said, come and meet Tom, Mandy. And I met him, and Wiggy instantly opened my book and he said, look, this is me and Mandy on operations together. And I was laughing and I said, oh, Tommy, one of my heroes. And he said, oh, for goodness sake. He said, you guys are the heroes. I'm just a bloody actor. And I was just like, oh, it's fantastic. And he was really nice. But no, that's just a flippant one. But actually, I was asked to be an ambassador for Girl Guiding. And I've now had a badge done. Now, this sounds insignificant, but if you were ever in anything like this, a badge is just like the best thing ever. And you get to stick it on your uniform. It's so exciting. And there's now an aeroplane badge, which is just phenomenal. So I was speaking in Guernsey. I went to the roadshow on Saturday last week and did a speech for all 220 girl guides, brownies, rainbows. And it's just fantastic. And I think, again, it is a real career high. It sounds minor, but it's that whole feeling of just constantly looking at how can you, inspire other people.
Oh yeah, I can totally see that. I think that's and it is, and a badge. I can remember badges from the Scouts. Maybe not quite the same significance, but they were still pretty important.
I'm going to show you my badge in a minute, Bob. You're going to be lucky.
Actually, I can't wait.
How that came from. Don't edit that incorrectly.
A very last question is, what's the most difficult question you've ever been asked?
Oh, this one. It's normally actually, there's a link. Probably it's by young children, actually, who often sort of go straight in and say, have you ever killed people? Have you dropped bombs? But it links into the slightly more intelligent question you then get asked at businesses, whereby people talk about the fact that you followed a passion to fly fast jets. How do you basically work out that with the reality of the fact that actually your actions will be then killing people?
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting one. And I don't think it's something that your training truly prepares you for. I don't think it's an area that they focus on enough. I don't know if that's changed. I hope it has. I know that there are life coaches now going through flying training and things like that. But that's a really big thing, actually, because you're doing something because you want to be the best at it. You want to get to be the best you can be, which for me was flying the Tornado, which was for you was single seat, which is fantastic. But ultimately, you've got to match that for the fact that your actions are going to have, irreparable consequences on people. So
yeah, it's interesting. I started out on the Bruggen in Germany on the strike roll, so in the nuclear strike roll, and that was definitely a bit of a consideration there. Where and obviously, thank goodness we never had to do it, but you were kind of conscious that you're not just carrying a bomb, you're carrying a really serious bomb now, and and so that was definitely. It was part of the calculation around and part of the interview process actually in very early doors that they said, are you prepared for this? Of course, if the answer was no, then that wasn't a good thing. But I mean, the other one that was very interesting is when I was Station Commander Coningsby, and one of the things we looked after obviously was the build-up of the Typhoon Force, but we were bringing that into the air defence of the UK side of life, which post 9/11, of course, has increasingly focused not just on kind of enemy aircraft, Russian aircraft, etc. typically, but airliners and rogue airliners and terrorism. And that was a really interesting debate in that space about, the what if, because if ultimately, you did have to take lethal action against, a civilian aircraft, I mean, that's a pretty big deal. And, we did very actively talk about how would we manage that, both for the individuals themselves that were involved and actually what would we do in terms of protecting them from the kind of wider ecosphere that would be outside, because there would definitely be a real challenge. If you'd shot down an airliner, you were going to be public enemy number one, weren't you? So it's going to be very, very difficult. And I think so they are getting better at it, I think, but it is still, I think there's a personal reconciliation issue and also that kind of wider system one, which is there.
I think they just used to think, because they'd asked that question in your interview at the start, are you okay to do that? You go, yeah. Yeah,
and you don't.
Of course you're going to say that because you want to fly fast jets. So, but it's almost like, no, reconcile it with the actual real thinking of it as well. So I'm glad to hear that they are doing more in that area, Bob.
And I think we're getting better as well about the whole, just look back on my time in Afghanistan about thinking about, PTSD. I mean, obviously it's been a factor now for ground forces for a while, but I think it's getting better, not least they've had to start thinking about it in the context of people flying drones and being remotely piloted.
Oh my God.
Because it's a really big deal for that. And then, so it's an improving situation, but I think it's definitely still got some way to go, like all of these things have. And hopefully it is continuous improvement. Hey, look, you've been fantastically generous, both with your time and with your comments. I knew it was going to be an entertaining conversation. I'd love probably there to be a part 2 at some point, because I think that would be fabulous. But I really, really appreciate your time, Mandy. Thank you very much indeed. It's really lovely to chat to you. Well done for all you have done and you are continuing to do, because I think it's an amazing, amazing success story. And as I said earlier, I think you're an amazing role model.
Oh, thank you so much, Bob. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.